Emily never imagined that becoming a stepmother at 32 would feel like stepping onto a moving train fast, loud, unpredictable, and always a little bit shaky under her feet. She had married Mark quickly, maybe quicker than people expected. But their connection had felt natural, grounded, and safe. What she hadn't been ready for was the challenge of becoming part of someone else's already built world. Especially Ethan's world. Mark's quiet, responsible, painfully private 22-year-old son who treated life like a long list of things he had to silently carry. Emily tried not to take his distance personally. She told herself he needed time, space, and maybe even quiet observation before letting anyone new in. She understood that. She respected it. Still, there were moments she would catch him walking past her with a polite nod, or lost in his thoughts as he drank coffee at the kitchen table. And she wished she knew what went through his mind. Not because she wanted to control anything. She simply wanted to be someone he could trust. Seattle's autumn rain had been steady for days. That Thursday felt like any other gray. Monotonous in the soft way only the Pacific Northwest could be. Emily left the office early because a meeting was canceled. She drove home with the windshield wipers fighting against the downpour, unaware that the next hour would change the way she looked at her stepson forever. When she pushed open the front door, the house was strangely quiet. Mark was out of town for a week on business, and she assumed Ethan had gone to campus or to work. She didn't expect anyone to be home. She slipped off her shoes, dropped her bag on the entry table, and headed toward the kitchen for a cup of tea. That was when she heard faint footsteps from upstairs. Not heavy, confident ones. More like someone pacing. Fast, uneven, nervous. Her first thought was that maybe Ethan had forgotten something before leaving. But pacing didn't match his usual calm, almost too composed demeanor. Something didn't feel right. Emily hesitated before climbing the stairs. Not wanting to invade his privacy, but something in the unusual rhythm of those footsteps pushed her forward. She turned the corner at the top of the stairs and froze. There, in the hallway, sitting on the floor like he had dropped to his knees from exhaustion, was Ethan. Papers surrounded him in messy circles. Bills, class notes, envelopes with red lettering, printed emails, and what looked like financial documents. His laptop screen flickered with an error message. His hair was tousled, his breathing unsteady. And he didn't even notice her standing there. She had never seen him like this. Not the serious student. Not the quiet young man who always kept his emotions tucked away. This was someone struggling, not just a little, but deeply. "Ethan," she said gently. He jerked slightly, startled. His eyes lifted slowly, and Emily's heart sank. They were red not from anger, but from the kind of tiredness that comes from holding things in too long. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed to even be caught feeling anything. "I didn't hear you come in," he muttered, trying to straighten the stack of papers even though they were sliding everywhere. "I didn't mean to scare you," she replied softly. "I didn't know you were home." He nodded, but his hands shook as he gathered the bills into a pile. Emily knelt a few feet away, giving him space, but showing she wasn't walking away. "Are you okay?" He let out a small, shaky breath. "Yeah, just doing some stuff." But his voice said otherwise. His voice said he was overwhelmed and scared and trying to hide it. Emily looked at the papers again. Tuition statements, overdue notices, job rejection emails, a broken laptop. It didn't take much to see the picture forming. He was trying to juggle too many responsibilities. Probably alone. Probably for a long time. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you're doing all this by yourself?" He paused. His jaw clenched. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "I don't want to bother Dad," he said. His words rushed, like he had rehearsed them many times. "He has so much going on with work, the mortgage, planning for the future. And you two just got married. I don't want to bring problems into that." Emily felt something squeeze in her chest. Not guilt, something gentler. Something protective. Something that came from seeing someone try so hard to be strong that they forgot they were allowed to fall apart sometimes. "You're not a problem," she said softly. He shook his head. You don't have to say that. If it wasn't true, I wouldn't. He didn't answer. He looked down at the papers again, breathing unevenly. Emily could tell he was fighting himself, battling between keeping his walls up and finally letting them crack. She sat beside him, close enough to show support, but far enough not to overwhelm him. She spoke calmly. When was the last time you asked anyone for help? He gave a small, humorless laugh. That's not really my thing. Maybe it should be, she replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain hit the windows hard, filling the silence. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, and the movement revealed how tired he truly was, dark circles under his eyes, stress written in the tightness of his shoulders. Emily saw the side of him he never showed, the part he tried to hide behind politeness and quiet independence. I know I'm an adult, he said finally. I should know how to handle my life by now. Being an adult doesn't mean carrying everything alone. He looked up at her slowly, almost like he didn't believe anyone would understand. I'm supposed to have it figured out, Emily. No one has it figured out, she said gently. His expression softened, but only for a second before he let out a trembling breath and dropped his head again. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Ethan, let me help you, even if it's just listening. He stared at her, his eyes full of things he didn't know how to say. Things he had probably buried for years. Emily could see him thinking, should he open up? Should he trust her? Should he keep pretending he was fine? It's not that simple, he whispered. It can be, if you let it. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again with a heaviness she hadn't seen before. I'm scared, Emily. Her heart dropped, not because he seemed weak, but because he finally allowed himself to be honest. What are you scared of? She asked softly. He swallowed hard. Letting Dad down. Letting myself down. Not being good enough. Not being able to keep up. I don't want him to think I'm failing. Emily could feel his fear. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was real. It's quiet fear that had been building over time until it finally spilled out on the hallway floor. You could never disappoint him, she said gently. You don't know that? I do, she said. Your father loves you more than anything. Ethan looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. He works so hard. I don't want to add pressure. You're not pressure, she replied. You're his son. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. Emily watched him carefully, not pushing too hard, just giving him room to let go. After a long pause, he looked at her with a vulnerable expression she had never seen on him before. Emily, can I ask you something? He said. Her pulse picked up, not from fear, but from feeling the weight of the moment. Of course, she answered. He hesitated, then said something that made Emily's breath catch, something that would change everything between them and redefine the way they understood each other. Something she never expected him to ask. And the hallway, once quiet and lonely, suddenly felt like the turning point of their entire family. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was low, careful, like he was stepping onto thin ice and wasn't sure how much weight it could hold. Can you help me tell Dad? He asked. Those words were simple, but they carried months of stress and fear. They carried the weight of someone who'd been trying to pretend he could handle everything alone. They carried the plea of a young man who didn't want to disappoint the only parent he had left. For a moment, Emily didn't breathe. Not because she didn't expect the question, but because she understood exactly what it meant. Ethan wasn't just asking for help with bills or school or documents. He was asking for partnership, trust, connection. He was letting her into his world for the first time. She nodded slowly. Of course I'll help you. Something inside Ethan loosened at those words. His shoulders dropped from their tight, guarded position. His gaze softened, as if he'd been afraid she might say no or judge him. But instead, she'd simply stepped closer. Thank you, he whispered. And for the first time since she met him, his voice didn't sound distant. It sounded real. The next hour moved fast. The hallway that had once been silent and tense became a space of motion and decisions. They gathered the papers, sorted them into piles, and talked through each one. Emily didn't take over. She didn't try to fix everything. She simply guided him, helped him see where solutions might be, and showed him he didn't have to dig himself out alone. Ethan explained his situation slowly at first, then with more confidence as he realized she wasn't judging him. He told her about losing hours at work, about struggling with tuition, about trying to save enough to avoid taking more loans. He talked about balancing school and work and expectations he put on himself. Emily listened carefully, never interrupting, except to ask a gentle question or offer a small suggestion. She learned things she wished she'd known earlier: how long he'd been skipping meals to save money, how he'd stayed up late for weeks trying to repair his old laptop, how he'd hidden notices in his backpack so Mark wouldn't worry. By the time they finished sorting everything, the house felt different, not physically, but emotionally. The air between them had changed. It wasn't tense or awkward. It wasn't polite distance. It was something warmer, calmer, more real. Ethan leaned back against the wall with a tired sigh. I didn't realize how much I was carrying until I saw it all with you. Emily smiled gently. Sometimes we need another person to help us see things clearly. Yeah, he said softly. I guess I do. That night they didn't tell Mark yet. He was still away on his work trip, and Ethan said he wanted to do this face to face, not over the phone. Emily agreed. Some conversations needed presence. Some truths deserved a steady room, not a rushed call from an airport. The next 2 days moved slowly for Ethan, quickly for Emily. She watched him regain pieces of himself, sleep longer, breathe easier, organize his thoughts instead of drowning in them. She made dinner, and he offered to help with dishes. He drank coffee in the kitchen rather than hiding in his room. They talked not deeply every moment, but enough to build something that hadn't existed before. He told her about his major, his dreams, his worries about choosing the wrong path. She shared her own struggles from her 20s, how she'd stumbled through jobs and rent and responsibilities. He listened in a way she hadn't seen before, really listened. Like he knew she understood him. For the first time, she felt like they weren't two strangers living under the same roof. They were becoming something closer still, not perfect. Still learning, but moving toward each other with honesty instead of fear by the time Mark returned home. The house had a strange energy. Ethan paced a little that morning, practicing what he'd say, stopping mid-sentence, starting again. Emily made tea and sat with him for a moment, grounding him. You don't have to be perfect, she said. Just be honest, he nodded, taking a deep breath. I just hope he doesn't think I messed up everything. Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm. Your father loves you more than you know, and he'll be proud of you for being strong enough to speak up. When the front door opened later that afternoon, Ethan flinched slightly, but Emily could tell he was ready. He squared his shoulders, exhaled slowly, and walked into the living room where Mark was setting down his suitcase. Hey, Dad, Ethan said, his voice steady but nervous. Mark looked up with a warm smile. Hey, buddy, how was your week? Then he noticed the tension in the air. His smile faded into concern. Everything okay? Ethan swallowed hard. I need to talk to you about something, and Emily's helping me. Mark glanced at her, then back at his son. He nodded slowly, sensing the seriousness. All right, let's sit down. They moved to the couch. Emily stayed beside Ethan, not speaking, but offering quiet support. Ethan explained everything, not dramatically, not blaming anyone, just telling the truth. He talked about school stress, financial struggles, losing work hours, trying to fix his laptop, and the fear that had been eating at him for months. Mark listened silently, eyes softening with every word his son spoke. When Ethan finished, he finally looked at his father. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I just didn't want you to think I was failing. Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Ethan, he said firmly but gently, you're not failing. You're trying. I should have handled it better, Ethan said. You handled it the best you could with what you had, Mark replied. Ethan looked down. I was scared. Mark's expression softened immediately. He moved closer and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I wish you came to me before it got this heavy, but I'm proud of you for speaking up now." Ethan blinked fast, surprised. "You're not disappointed?" "Never," Mark said. "You're my son. Nothing changes that." Emily watched the moment quietly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried the weight of every unspoken fear Ethan had carried. It was healing in its own quiet way. When Mark pulled his son into a firm emotional hug, Ethan didn't resist. Emily felt her eyes sting for a second, not out of sadness, but from witnessing something rare and honest later that evening. After plans were made to help Ethan manage his tuition and work schedule, after the stress had settled, after dinner was shared with lighter hearts, Ethan stepped into the kitchen where Emily was washing dishes. He leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't closed off. He looked like he had something he needed to say, "Emily?" he asked softly. She turned toward him. "HM." He hesitated for just a second. "Thank you for not giving up on me even when I wasn't easy to reach." Emotion warmed her chest. "You never made me want to walk away." He looked down with a small, genuine smile she hadn't seen before. "I'm glad you're here." "Really glad." She returned the smile. "Me too." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It wasn't something that changed the world. But it changed something inside both of them, in that quiet kitchen. With warm lights and the scent of dinner still in the air, they finally felt like a family, not perfect, not instant, but real. And Emily realized it all started because she found a young man trying to survive alone and refused to let him stay alone.